All right, welcome in everybody to the Make It Take It podcast. We're here on Wednesday, February 28th. I'm John Yaley. I'm joined by Victor Kustin, my co-host, and stepping in for Adam Oppenheim, who couldn't make it today, Gio Salazar. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Excited for the episode.
Yeah, happy to have Dustin on.
All right, yeah, so we got a good episode today. We're going to start with cleaning the glass like usual, just go over, past few days around the association, big games, big moments, that kind of thing. And then we're interviewing Dustin Dopirak, who is the Indiana Pacers beat writer at the Indianapolis Star. We're very excited about that. Get more of an insight on the Pacers from someone who actually works around the team. And then we'll end it with our normal at the buzzer, going over big games, rest of the weekend, to kind of get you primed until next week, our Monday podcast. So we'll just get right into it for cleaning the glass. I'll turn it over to you, Victor. What has stuck out to you the past few days?
Last night was a Cavs-Mavs game, and Strus had an electric fourth quarter. Shot 5 of 5 from deep in the fourth, brought the team back. They were down pretty much the entire game. And actually, the shot was the second longest game-winning buzzer beater in NBA history, only behind Devontae Graham's 61-footer against the Pelicans. That was in 2021. I mean, I think this is exactly what this Cavs team needs: is a guy that could shoot and just get on fire for them and score in bunches. And this is a good sign of things to come for the Cavs.
Yeah, a little bit of shades of that Jeremy Lamb.
Yeah,
a while ago.
Yeah,
that was exactly what I thought of when I saw it. I'll just say tough break for the Mavericks. You have a big road win against the 2 seed in the East, and they need every win they can get. They're sitting at the 8 seed, only a game back from avoiding the play-in. So pretty tough for them. Yeah, Gio, what did you have?
Yeah, we have to talk about that Trae Young injury, man. I mean, reevaluated in 4 weeks, so he won't even be back, necessarily in 4 weeks for a Hawks team that's already been pretty disappointing this season. They're barely hanging on to that play-in spot with Brooklyn and Toronto 4 games behind. But I think DeJounte Murray and Jalen Johnson can kind of right the ship for now until Trae Young comes back. And it's not like they have a hot team behind them to take their playing spot, so I think they'll be all right.
I will say I'm kind of interested to see how this team plays without Trae Young and with DeJounte Murray as the lead guard and scorer, because we know how well he could defend. And maybe there's more guys on their bench that could come out and prove that they should be getting more minutes.
I think it's interesting. It's almost like a worse version of the kind of Cavs injury they had with Garland, where they were dealing with Garland and Mitchell, who are both very good, but kind of on each other's corner, both handling the ball, big scoring loads. And then Garland got hurt. Mitchell kind of took over fully, and the team started to click. Obviously, the Hawks are much worse than the Cavs, but there's been kind of, let's just say it hasn't clicked between DeJounte and Trae. So I'm interested, does the team do better? And then maybe you trade Trae Young. Do they do worse? And it kind of confirms what a lot of people are saying. They should trade DeJounte. So interesting to see kind of how it turns out for them. I'll bring up the Boston Celtics, who had another great win last night. They beat Philly, who doesn't have Embiid, but beat them by 18 points. They're now 46-12, which is a 79% win percentage, which would put them at 65 wins for the year. If they keep this pace, that'd be the best record for a team since the Rockets back in 2018. And they don't seem to be slowing down. 9-1 in their last 10. People are kind of waiting to see if Kristaps, they kind of put him in bubble wrap for the playoffs. But I'm just kind of curious what your guys' thoughts are on the team.
Yeah, I think we touched on this last episode. Like, Celtics, every year they come out, they're a juggernaut in the regular season. They're a top seed. They look like they're poised for the finals, and something just doesn't get them over the hump. So, I'm not doubting them. I'm just saying, will this finally be the year that they get over the hump? Is Porzingis that piece that they needed to bolster them above the rest of the teams in the league?
Yeah, to bounce off what Victor said, I mean, you just have to peak at the right time, and they never really seem to do that. But maybe things could change this year. Maybe, like you mentioned, Porzingis to kind of taking care of him a little bit. But yeah, man, they're gonna have to change something in the playoffs to really make this record worth it. But yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I think the X factor is obviously Porzingis. He's an element they haven't had in the past, but he could get injured at any time and be out for the playoffs. Wouldn't surprise me. Do you guys have any more thoughts, or should we get on to Dustin?
I'm excited to talk to Dustin. Let's get after it.
All right, sounds good. Let's bring him in, Jason, when you get a chance.
Hey, fellas, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
How you doing, Dustin?
Doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we want to thank you for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it.
No problem at all.
right.
So I've been kind of slow on taking the invites, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So, just for those who tuned in, this is Dustin Dopirak. He is the Indiana Pacers beat writer for the Indianapolis Star. So, just to kind of start us off, Dustin, if you want to take our listeners through a quick rundown of your career in sports media, what are the different beats you've worked? What does your journey look like?
It's a long one. I've been around a lot. I mean, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, graduated from Penn State in 2004. I was, sports editor of the paper out there. Did my first 5 years in a little town called Harrisonburg, Virginia. Covered James Madison basketball. So kind of mid-major college ball, the CAA at the time that league was pretty good. Got to Indiana the first time in 2009, was at the Herald Times for 5 years there. So spent obviously a lot of time covering the IU beat. During what was a really interesting period. Obviously they took over, I think, the beat in the second year of the Tom Crean era. So saw those guys rise up to the Sweet 16 teams in 2012 and 2013. Obviously the 13 team was supposed to go further, but also covered the College World Series teams, with Kyle Schwarber, Sam Travis and those guys. Left IU, left Bloomington to cover the Tennessee football beat for a couple years, Knoxville News Sentinel. Went to a site called DK Pittsburgh Sports, covered the Pirates and the Steelers there, came back to Indiana in 2018 at The Athletic to cover IU, Purdue, and Butler basketball. Was part of the pandemic layoffs in June of 2020, basically, when we kind of went through about 45 people there. Got back to the Herald Times, which is now owned by Gannett, and the same company that owns the Indy Star. So did a couple more years in the IU beat there, and then got moved over to the Pacers beat last November. So this is my second year on the Pacers beat. Long story, just, a lot of bouncing around and, now, but cool to say I've covered Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, college basketball, football, and baseball. It's been a journey. It's been a trip, and it's been a weird time to be in sports media because everything's gone weird. But basically, after all that, here I am. It's sort of one of my more stable jobs, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an awesome journey covering multiple different sports and college and professionals. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you talk about the teams at Indiana in 2013? Great teams. Part of the reason I came to this school. What is it like covering college teams versus professional teams? Like, what's the big difference?
The biggest difference is access, and obviously just the who you're covering. I think one reason why I'm really excited to cover the NBA now, why I'm enjoying it now, is because they're adults. That's obviously the biggest difference is you don't have the same reason to kind of keep them under sort of constraints. I mean, if you guys have spent any time since covering the IU basketball beat, that it's generally pretty locked off in terms of who you're allowed to talk to and when. Most of the interviews you get are in a very controlled environment. Usually those guys only talk on podiums and whatnot, so that you don't really get to know them. I felt that increasingly to be the case, over the years on the IU basketball beat. And I don't, hold that against anybody, because it's just, again, they're college kids, and I understand the need to protect the brand, and they, they're 18 to 22. So you don't want them in positions where they could, say something that's going to, injure their reputation or the brand or anything like that, the brand of IU. So I understand why, but obviously, it's there's a lot more access, to these guys because, again, they're their own brand. They're millionaires. They have to be trusted to be able to speak to the media themselves without having to constantly run everything through PR. I mean, they obviously do. There is some level of public relations department control that you get, but for the most part, you can just talk to these guys and just have normal conversations with them and get to know them. there's open locker room that you just never have at IU. Obviously, there's a handful of college programs that will open the locker room up after games from time to time, but it's mandated, obviously, in professional sports at various levels. Obviously, the end, it's different, baseball versus football versus basketball. But basketball, every day from, for a 7 o'clock tip, every day from 5:45 to 6:15, the locker room's open. And you can just go in there. And so, they get used to you, you get used to them in ways that you just don't in college when it comes to major college sports. I mean, I think even, what was really fun for me, I think covering IU baseball when they got good is they didn't have a whole lot of media attention at the time. I mean, you look at the Bart Kaufman field days when they were at Sembauer. I mean, there was nobody over there. So there was just basically me and Zach Osterman. Zach was at another outlet at the time, and we would just go over and cover IU baseball games, and they got to know us. But when it comes to major college sports, because, generally there's a really big media contingent, even bigger than you have for pros, because it costs a lot more money to really follow an NBA or Major League Baseball team, for instance. You don't have as big of a media contingent following them around everywhere. College is generally really huge and less access. So that's really the biggest thing. And just dealing with adults and dealing with, I haven't been as good about this, but agents and trades and, free agency and movement and whatnot, that's a little bit different than at the college game. But the biggest thing is just the access and just being able to have regular conversations with adults as opposed to people that are sort of being, reasonably so protected.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned about dealing with adults and, getting to know the players more because they're in the professional leagues for longer than they're in college basketball. What's it kind of been like with the Pacers? Because I feel like this is a team that's made a lot of moves recently, trading for players. Not really, not a lot of players are sticking around for a long time. Not saying like they're choosing not to stick around.
Sure.
They're just kind of building unconventionally. So what's that kind of been like with the Pacers this year and the whole Siakam trade and all that?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously there's still a lot, a lot of the guys that, I've only been there for 2 seasons. So basically most of the guys that were there when I started are still there. It's a wholly different, universe if you've been covering the team for 4 years. I mean, it's a totally different team since then. They've mostly started to sense, kind of who their core is, obviously, starting with Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner, Aaron Nesmith, Benedict Mathurin, Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, even, those guys have been around the entire time, but you certainly see how they're trying to, build towards something. And the fact that their kind of window or getting, I guess, to their window has accelerated. They certainly see Halliburton as a guy that's hitting his stardom track quicker, maybe even than they expected. And so they obviously viewed it, saw an opportunity with Siakam to get another All-NBA player because they certainly felt like they needed that. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that I think you need 2 stars at least to be able to be a truly contending team in the NBA. You can beat a lot of teams without that if you just have one really good guy and a bunch of pretty good pieces around him. And the Pacers were able to do that for a while this year. But Siakam gives them something they just haven't had. And just having a guy that they can really rely on to say, hey, if they're throwing 2 bodies at Tyrese all the time, we need somebody to go find a way to get us 20. Can you do that on a nightly basis? And Siakam is that guy. But, obviously they've moving some other pieces around, trying to figure out, what their core has to be or what all they need when they're going to be a championship contender. I think they're at least a year, maybe 2 years away from being in that conversation, but they certainly are trying to be as competitive of a playoff team as they can, get into the postseason and try to go somewhere. And I think they obviously felt like they had to make that move. On the side, the other side of that is they are trying to sort of make decisions for the long term while still thinking that they're a worse team for having traded Buddy Hield. I think they lost a significant amount of punch really in the second unit there. He started to play with that group, and really their depth was their biggest strength. That's the thing that they had. I think that nobody else could match. They didn't necessarily have the same top line talent as certainly a Boston or a Milwaukee or even a Cleveland or New York. But they could really go 10, 11 deep and, have a bunch of guys who could score the basketball. And I think really that second unit, I think, was really shaping into something. They'd switched pieces around, bringing in Siakam and with Halliburton coming back. But I mean, they were looking at a second unit of McConnell, Hield, Mathurin, Toppin, Jalen Smith. I mean, that whole group can score. And I think they're significantly less for not having Buddy. And I think that is a loss, but they have made that trade because they knew they were probably going to lose him. Obviously he was coming to the end of a 4-year, $92 million deal. I think he certainly was hoping to get a raise. And I think their view was, we're not paying you any more than we're paying you right now. And certainly weren't able to come to an agreement. Hield, I think, saw an opportunity in Philadelphia. Certainly the Sixers needed anybody to put the ball in the bucket with Embiid gone. So they obviously decided to make that move, try to get some, future assets, get a guy in McDermott that they were hoping was going to be able to give him at least some scoring punch down the stretch. They knew that he wasn't going to be able to match what Hield was doing, but they were hoping it was like, okay, this is a guy that will at least have some shooting gravity. That hasn't been the case so far, and he's out tonight with a calf strain. Don't know how long that's going to be an issue, but still, I think they clearly lost some firepower, but their view is that they were going to lose it eventually, and they were going to have to get something that was going to help them, bring in more assets for the future. So they have had to kind of straddle this line of, getting a guy like Siakam that makes you a lot better right now, to letting go a guy like Hield that, and that makes you significantly worse right now, but trying to figure out, all right, if you're going to have to get more pieces, what assets you're going to need to be able to do that.
All right. Yeah. You mentioned that you think teams need 2 stars really to compete. Obviously the Pacers are hoping Siakam's that guy to pair alongside Halliburton. But you also mentioned, they kind of traded present for future with the Buddy Hield trade. Right now they're the 8 seed, but they're only a half game out of the 5 seed. I'm curious what you think this team's ceiling is come playoff time.
I mean, a lot of things can happen. I think obviously the where they get seated is going to matter. And I think you're now seeing that group really bunch together. And obviously Philadelphia has come back dramatically because, playing without Embiid, and they're just not a much, when they've got Maxey and Embiid, they're a top 3 team in the East. And when they don't, they're not in that caliber. Maxey, I think, has made huge strides. He's a really impressive player, but they don't have a second guy at that level. So they could keep falling. And I think, the Pacers probably belong in that conversation with Miami and Orlando. That's probably where they fit. If you really look at, okay, what does everybody else have and what do they have? That's probably where they are and where they make sense. But they're not too far back of New York and Cleveland, I don't think, from a talent standpoint. Milwaukee, I think, has underperformed a little bit. But, I think Milwaukee should be the 2 seed in the East. They should, when you have Giannis and Damian Lillard and Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton. Middleton obviously hasn't played very much because of injuries, but if that group should be the second best team in the East. And so they're not that far off of Cleveland, New York. But they belong, I think, in that Miami, Orlando sphere. But I think they are dangerous because they have beaten everybody ahead of them. The only team in the top 8 that they have not beat at least once this year is Orlando. So what that tells you is they can get in the playoffs as a 6 or a 7 or somebody like that and be dangerous. I don't see them being able to, maybe they pull one off if they get in this, if they end up in that 8 seed, if they end up having to play in the play-in, losing the first one, winning the second one, and you get a best of 7 with Boston. They could probably get one, but I think Boston just seems to have that gear to me that they're not going to mess around with an 8 seed, out of the gate. I think they are certainly, as you guys were talking about earlier, they're building towards, can they win a title? Can they win the whole thing this year? And you really just, you saw that gear last night. Philly was keeping it close to midway through the 4th, and Tatum just goes off, and you certainly, Tatum and Brown can go off at any time. You've got Holiday and White are 2 of the best, perimeter defenders in the league. And they are better with Porzingis. The depth is an issue with them, but you tend to only go 7 or 8 deep in the playoffs anyway. I think they're a little bit better prepared for that than sometimes they have been in the past. So bottom line, if you're the Pacers, nobody wants to be facing Boston in the first round. I don't think they're invincible if they get a Milwaukee in the Eastern Conference Finals, or if they get a Cleveland there or something like that. I don't think they're unbeatable. But they're definitive favorites. So if you're the Pacers, you don't want them. But if you're the Pacers, you've beaten Milwaukee 4 out of 5. You feel like you have Milwaukee's number. They've played Cleveland twice. They've beat them twice. And they're, I think, 2 out of 3. Or are they even against the Knicks? Or are they 2 out of 3 against the Knicks? They've beaten the Knicks twice. So they have to view, I think, those games as absolutely winnable. Anybody, I think, other than Boston, that they could face in a best of 7, I think they feel absolutely winnable. I honestly believe, like, The team that I think has their number the most, and I have the least faith in them beating out of the top 8, is Orlando, because they haven't done it, and they're a particularly bad matchup, and they're not great against teams that have a lot of length, that have a lot of size, and that's why Toronto is a bad matchup for them. Even though Toronto is not really skilled, the Pacers can only beat them if they outshoot them. And Orlando, I think, is in that vein of, like, with the Wagners and with Banchero and with Carter, they tend to really struggle with that amount of size when they're that big from 1 to 5. But like, they are capable of getting on a run. When the offense is really kicking, they're capable of getting on a run. They're capable of winning a playoff series. Can they win multiple in a row? Can they string that out? I mean, they haven't shown that level of consistency. They tend to every 4 or 5 games or so, there's at least one performance where, like, well, what are you guys doing? I don't know that their ceiling is getting much beyond a playoff series, but it wouldn't shock me to see them win one.
Yeah, so you mentioned, like, how the Pacers, they like to outshoot their opponent. They like to score quick. And on our last episode, or 2 episodes ago, we talked about our biggest question for each team. And for me, my biggest question with the Pacers is, in the playoffs, when it comes to the half-court offense, when the game slows down, and when you have to defend as well, will this team be able to show up then? Because, like you said, there's not a lack of talent on this team. This team has a lot of talent, but they're giving up 3rd most points per game in the league, and I know that's because of their pace of play. So what are kind of your thoughts on, I guess, the newer style of their pace of play, and how that will affect their performance in the playoffs?
Well, they're not a good defensive team. Like, regardless of pace, pace has something to do with it, but they're not a good defensive team, and they haven't been all year. And they had some stretches where they were okay, and I think that's the issue, is just trying to be okay enough. Like you said, I mean, the game does slow down in the playoffs, and that's going to be an issue for them. That's certainly going to be that is a huge thing and a really important thing to highlight. They can still score on the half court because the ball moves really, really fast. They'd rather get you quick, get you in the first 5 or 6 seconds, because they'll break on you after you scored. It's not a situation where, like, okay, they're going to walk, after you score on them, they're going to walk it up or presume that your defense will be set. When you score on them, they want to come right back at you, and they're going to try to do that as much as they can, even in a playoff setting. But they are not a good defensive team. And I think they are, they match up better now that they have Pascal Siakam, but Siakam hasn't proven to be like a game-changing defensive guy. They've been without Aaron Nesmith for a couple games, and that matters, but they still just struggle to, if a team really wants to take it to them in the paint, they tend to be successful. I mean, the Raptors just got 78 in the paint the other night, and they had 84 on the 14th. So, like, again, like, they're a bad matchup for teams that have that kind of size, but they're dead last. They give up the most points in the paint per game in the league. I think it's 59.6, something like that. It might be up now. And so, yeah, I mean, there's several issues there that lead to that. One is, their best player is not a great on-ball defensive player. Tyrese Halliburton is an absolute magician with the basketball in his hand, but if you're going to drive at him, you're probably going to win. And so, they, structure their defense to try to give him the easiest matchup they can. If you really hunt him, you can obviously get him. And so, I know Jaylen Brown did that when they played, I think, January 6th. Basically the first night of that kind of like 2 out of 3, back-to-back with the Celtics. I mean, Jaylen Brown just found him and just took it to him all game long. So that's an issue. As phenomenal as he is offensively, he's beatable defensively. And so when you've got one hole, teams can usually find it. And Siakam's just okay. Nembhard, I think, is a pretty good defender. Nesmith is a pretty good defender. When you get in that second unit, there's a couple guys that are okay. McConnell's really good on the ball, and he's going to get you some steals in the backcourt. Ben Shepherd is a guy that, as a rookie, has really shown out. But there's not a whole lot of depth there in terms of defensive talent. Obi Toppin's just okay at best. Benedict Mathurin is good sometimes, and he's not great in others. So they're individually not a great defensive team. So they're collectively not a great defensive team. So that makes them absolutely vulnerable to, really good offenses there. And they've generally tried to outscore people. They went from a stretch from about Christmas to when they got Siakam and a little bit after, where they were probably, if you kind of look at that span, they were, probably top 20 in defensive rating, somewhere in the 17th, 18th range. But I think for the year, they're somewhere like 26th. And again, that's defensive rating. That's per possession. So, it has something to do with pace, but mostly it has to do with these guys just aren't really good at locking down and stopping people.
Hey, Dustin, you mentioned that the team has kind of lost some depth after trading Buddy Hield. How do you think a team like this can overcome that come playoff time?
They need some guys to step up that are being asked to do more now. I mean, again, they still have better depth than most teams, because you could still go, they've got 3 centers they can trust. They've got 3 point guards they can trust. They have several wings. When they get Aaron Nesmith back, he's questionable for tonight. You've got, him at the 3 and then Mathurin coming off the bench, and that's a pretty good duo. Ben Shepherd's, I think, going to be really important for them. He's a guy whose minutes up until this point have been not that much, but he's been asked to do a lot in the last few games. Again, with McDermott out tonight, he's going to have to certainly play on that second unit, whether they have Nesmith or not. He came through with a really big stop at the end of the Raptors game to clinch that one. He was kind of in an ISO situation on RJ Barrett. Managed to do a really good job of walling him off and forcing him to take kind of a fadeaway in the lane. He's the other night against Dallas, he was 5 of 5 from 3, hit some big time shots in that game to help him win that. So he's a guy that they're gonna, definitely gonna look to ask a lot more of. He's a late first round pick, 26, I think he went overall. Basically he and Jarris Walker were spending a lot of time, going back and forth together to the G League. But Shepherd is a little bit more game ready. Walker, I think, has a higher ceiling, certainly as a lottery pick. But Shepherd has proven, in Rick Carlisle's words, that he's just a really good system guy. Move the ball, but take the open 3 and defend wings. I mean, he's a guy that can really handle people 1 through 3, and give them somebody that's better than most of their guys. I could probably argue he's probably their 3rd best perimeter defender after Nembhard and Nesmith at just being able to stop somebody who's trying to drive it on him. So that's a guy that they're going to need to step up. Going to need to get a lot of production from the centers, from Jalen Smith and Isaiah Jackson, because that's an area of strength for them. Need Obi Toppin to keep performing, keep shooting the ball well. He's been really good at getting to the rim and finishing there, and been a tremendous, just transition force. He's one of the best, rim runners in the league. But he adds another element when he's also hitting from 3, and so they could use as much of that as possible, just to get them as much capacity to score in the half court with that second unit as possible. I think will go a long way for them.
All right, Dustin, we're going to switch gears a little bit away from the Pacers. Just want to ask, because the All-Star weekend was a couple weekends ago in Indy. What was it like to have the All-Star game in kind of the home city of the team that you cover?
Oh, it's wild. I mean, because it's just, obviously when you're going to have an event like that, the whole newspaper gets involved. It's not just going to be you. It's not just going to be sports. Basically they're going to involve, your arts and entertainment team, your news team, photographers are all over the place all week. It was really just cool to kind of take on kind of a team event like that. I mean, we brought in basically all our Colts guys, had something to do with it. Nathan Brown, our IndyCar guy, Joel Erickson, Nate Atkins, just really everybody teamed up for that. And during the most of an NBA season, it's mostly just me out and about. And so, Greg Doyle will come by from time to time and do a column and whatnot, but it's mostly me on a nightly basis. And it was cool to, really team up. And we were just running all over the place everywhere, because what happens is you get this whole list of all these sort of PR pitches of people like, this person's going to be here at this time. Can you make it? This type person's going to be here at that time. You have to kind of make decisions of, all right, well, what do we want to cover? What do we not want to cover? All of these, celebrities, luminaries, former players and whatnot are going to be here all at the same time. I mean, how do you get to all of that and what actually needs to be written? And so it was cool to be a part of that, and cool to just be a part of that for the Star, but also just, as an NBA fan, as a basketball fan, as a general sports fan, to just see everybody that was in here was wild. I mean, I think the first night, Thursday night, basically, I mean, I just got back from Toronto, the last game of the pre-break period, at like 3 p.m. I landed, drove through the traffic, had to, literally parked my car on Delaware Street and booked to the convention center, because they had a 6 o'clock thing with the guys from TNT, with Barkley, with Kenny Smith, and with Shaq. And it's like, wow, 3 hours after I'm off the plane, I'm literally looking Shaq in the eye and asking him what he thinks about the Pacers. And you're like, wow, that's Shaq. He's right there. Charles Barkley is right there. And it was fun because those guys, when they're not on TV, they also like they don't care about if they cuss on the record, like not a problem with them at all. So you're just hearing Barkley just casually throwing F-bombs around, and you're like, wow, like this is really really a thing. And like, they're on it. Like obviously, like what makes them as good as they are, on TV is their honesty, is because they don't hold back. And like, they'll just say, oh, they're terrible. Like he doesn't have a problem saying that. Barkley certainly doesn't say like, I can't guard anybody. It's this, and they were a lot of fun to talk to. It was super entertaining, and you're just there like, wow, like, Shaq is literally bigger than life. I mean, he is just an absolutely humongous human being just to look at, but you're like, wow, like this guy owned the league, for how many years. And so when I was a kid, basically when I was a kid and when I was in high school, like Shaq was the Colossus standing across the NBA, especially, immediately after Jordan retired. It was kind of Shaq, Hakeem's league and David Robinson's league, and not David Robinson's league, it was really Shaq's league for that period where he was really determined who was going to win. And you're like, wow, this guy's, I'm really talking to this guy. And so, Reggie Miller, we'll obviously talk to him later. And just seeing all these guys around, Spike Lee's in the crowd. I was like, I don't think I'd ever covered a game with Spike Lee in it, like that kind of deal. It was just so much surreal, I guess, is the thing, because it's a weird event to cover, because most of the time when you really focus that much on covering a big event, there's a championship at the end. There's a trophy. Like if you're going to cover the NCAA tournament, you're like, okay, there's going to be, people are going to be shedding tears at the end of this thing. Like it's going to be really, really emotional. It's different when the All-Star game, because like at the end of the day, they're going to play a game that none of them really care about. They're just gonna kind of throw in trick shots and half court heaves and whatever, and it's just gonna be goofy. So like that's different, that you're not kind of gearing up for it like, man, this has got to be this big event that we've got to do a great job of capturing. But it's just gonna be like, it's this constant run around in circles of everything is happening all the time, and which of it matters, tough to say, but it's a spectacle. And it was a cool thing to cover. I'm of the sort of like, I like the dunk contest. Like everybody has been wanting to bury it for decades now, and I'm so glad that we'll still show up and watch it. 3-point, that kind of deal. So to be able to be in the building for that was really cool too. I mean, even though G League kid wins it, and probably another G League kid probably should have been in the finals, and I think Jacob Toppin outperformed Jaylen Brown to me. But all the same, it's still an awesome spectacle. I mean, Mac McClung cleared Shaq. That's a remarkable thing to do. And so I felt like anybody who was there got their money's worth to see that.
Yeah, I agree. And I have one final question for you. I don't know about these guys, but you've covered so many different teams, so many different sports. What would you say was your most like iconic or most memorable moment, like with any team anywhere?
Wow. I think, and it's been interesting because it's still been it's been a topic obviously this week. We know with the Kyle Filipowski situation. The wildest thing I've ever covered is still Indiana beating Kentucky in 2011. I think like that's like, it's an odd thing to say that, because obviously I've covered tournaments, and probably had the most fun covering the College World Series, because that was just such an unexpected run, with Schwarber and those guys, because you just, you don't cover Indiana College. At that time, you didn't cover any Big Ten, baseball team and think you're going to end up in Omaha, covering them in Omaha, because like that hadn't happened since '84, prior to that. And the tire status has changed and everything like that. So that was really cool. But like the, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm watching in front of me thing, that Indiana and Kentucky is still number one on the list for me for that, because it was just a moment where you're like, when the shot goes down, I remember just thinking to myself, like, there's nothing that would be over the top for this. There's no reaction that I would think would be too much, because you were considering how far down Indiana had been, how high up Kentucky had gone, how deep, like, I mean, Indiana fans really viewed Kentucky as the evil empire at that point. I mean, that's still relatively early in the Calipari period, and that was his best team. I mean, that's Anthony Davis, and the team that ended up winning the title. And you're thinking, man, they just took down this Kentucky team. Like, nothing will surprise me in terms of what this fan base does at this particular moment. And within seconds, there's not an open tile on Assembly Hall. Like somebody is standing on every inch of it. You're like, wow, like this was nuts. I remember thinking, I'm not sure how we're going to get to the other side of basically, like, because you got to go from. We were on that kind of press row behind the scorer's table. So to get to where, the interviews had to be like, we had to go through across all of that. And you're like, what do we have to crowd surf? Like, what are we going to do here? Like, how do we even get there to conduct interviews? And obviously it took a while before anybody even wanted to talk because they were up, on the, scoreboard singing and everything like that. And it was still wild. I thought we did a good job of covering it. It was Ryan Karchi was our columnist at the time, and he's covers USC at the Los Angeles Times now. And so it was the two of us on the beat. And so I thought we did a really good job of covering that and sort of capturing the moment on that. But that was still nuts. Like, that's still the one event that I'm like, wow, I cannot believe I was at that thing. And I know it gets a certain amount of grief now because you're like, okay, well, that's still the peak moment of the last 15 years of Indiana. So you guys are still living on that. And it's an issue if you're IU. It certainly is an issue if you're IU because it's just like, that was an event that deserved a better postscript. And, that team obviously, certainly I think it maxed out that season, getting back to play Kentucky again. They weren't going to take them down twice. And, by tournament time, Kentucky was absurd, and Davis was out of hand. And they had other dudes, Terrence Jones and those guys. And man, I can't remember the guards on that team, but those guys are just loaded. But the next year, obviously, that team should have been better. And so I think that still remains a something that will hurt IU fans forever is that 2012-13 team, getting, chopped down by Syracuse will still, I think, sting forever because that is a team that was good enough to win. And I think they just kind of ran out of gas. Basically, I mean, like part of it was the zone, but I don't think it's not like Tom Crean doesn't know how to deal with a 2-3 zone. It was just they were kicked. I mean, they were just beat, and because they were just exhausted themselves all year. But yeah, I still think that is the coolest sort of individual one game moment. But I get why Indiana fans still look at that. It's like, don't talk to me about that anymore because you had to have achieved something beyond a non-conference win in 2011 to be excited about over the last 15 years. I
mean, I think everyone here saw it, but when you mentioned that, I still do. I have chills on my arms just from that moment. I grew up an IU fan. Like, my dad came here, and I remember exactly where I was for that. And I can't believe that you were able to cover that. That's an awesome story, and thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Yeah, that's Dustin. Thank you again for taking the time. That's all we have for you. We really appreciate you doing this for us.
Absolutely. Anytime, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Dustin. Thank you.
You guys have a good one. Thanks.
All right. So now, thank you again to Dustin.
That was cool.
That was cool. That was fun. Cool. Yeah. Sadly, I think he is right about that being IU's peak.
I still have chills. Like I still have chills on my arm. Like, that moment is so special. It really is.
All right. So we'll wrap up. We got about 10 minutes at the buzzer. We'll just go ahead and look over the games for the upcoming week. We got a stacked week of NBA games, which is pretty great. So we'll dive into a few of these. I'll just start off with Lakers at Clippers, which is tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. My quick thoughts on it. Lakers are the 10 seed, which is tough, but they're 7-3 in their last 10, so they're playing pretty well, and they're only 3.5 out of the 6 seed and avoiding the play-in. Meanwhile, the Clippers, they're kind of locked into the 4, it looks like, at least out of the top 2, only 3 back at the 1 seed, but the Timberwolves and Thunder stayed hot. So obviously, I think the Lakers need this more, but just curious to see just kind of how both these teams play. Do the Clippers really turn it on and try to keep this hot stretch going to end the year? Or are they kind of complacent? Lakers are a lot more, kind of hungry, desperate, I guess. So just excited to see how these teams play.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think this is obviously always both teams in LA, huge rivalry. Lakers, big brother forever to the Clippers. And the Clippers always seem to have what we say is the better roster than this team, but never could get it done in the end. Maybe the Lakers will come out hungry and continue this hot streak. But like we said, the Clippers still have a great roster. And yeah, I'm excited to watch that game as well. But another one I want to mention is Warriors at Knicks on Thursday. I think that the Warriors have a lot to prove, and so do the Knicks. Like, the Warriors are an established team that's not performing to their best, and the Knicks are not so much established team that is performing very well. So I kind of want to see who's going to come out in this one. Steph versus Brunson. I think it's just a great matchup on TNT.
Yeah, I think it's really going to depend how much help Steph gets in that game because, the supporting cast hasn't been at its best recently, but Yeah, man, the Warriors against the Knicks. It will be high scoring, but I'm interested to see who out of Steph and Jalen Brunson drops the most points.
Yeah, actually, this was another one I had written down. I'm very excited for Warriors. It's actually interesting. So obviously the Warriors have been worse on the year, Knicks have been better. But the Warriors, despite being the 9 seed, they're 8-2 in their last 10. They've kind of been coming on strong. Draymond's back. The team's hoping they could, sneak in through the play-in or the 6 seed. Meanwhile, the Knicks, who are the 4 seed right now, they're 3-7 in their last 10. They've been struggling. Randall should be back soon. That's kind of the hope. But this will be interesting. Do we look back on this in April when the playoffs start and the Warriors are much higher in the standings and we feel better about them than the Knicks? And the Knicks have kind of fallen off. Or is this just a hot stretch for the Warriors, cold stretch for the Knicks, and it'll kind of even out?
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to mention the Warriors again because they play the Celtics on Sunday. So this is a big, big stretch for the Warriors. Playing 2 tough teams in 5 days. The Celtics, as we talked about, are juggernauts this regular season. And it's 2022 Finals rematch. The Warriors need this game a lot more than the Celtics do. But, both teams are going to be going at it because there's a little bad blood, I think, after those finals. Did you guys see the thing, where Steph said to them, he was like, enjoy your last win.
Enjoy your last win.
Yeah.
So the Celtics might come with some bad blood. I don't know.
Oh, this is an interesting game because even though the Warriors really need this win more than the Celtics, I feel like it's a good test for the Celtics to, the playoffs, any player can go off on you at any time. And Curry might absolutely do that. So I'd be interested to see how they kind of respond to that. Maybe the team as a whole can, keep up with Curry. But, yeah, I don't know, man. This is a good test for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with you, Gio. Obviously, the Warriors need way more. Celtics could kind of coast through this one. But as we talked about to open the show, they kind of haven't, given up on winning games this year. They're still kind of in 4th gear, going strong, still doing really well. Obviously, they're great at home. So I think Celtics will probably win this, but it would be a great win for the Warriors. And I think it would they've been in this hot stretch, but no one's taken them seriously. If they won that game, it would kind of be a statement, which I know is kind of cliche, but statement win that the hot streak might actually mean this team is kind of back to what they've been, last year, maybe even 2022. That's kind of a stretch, but we'll see. Gio, is there a game this week that you're looking at?
Man, the Clippers against the Timberwolves looks like a really good game. We mentioned that the Clippers are 3 games behind the Timberwolves for that 1 seed. I don't know, man. I think if the Clippers can beat the Lakers tonight, and then continue a hot streak, they might be able to catch the Timberwolves. But man, both the Timberwolves and the Nuggets are hot, so it would be tough for them to catch up.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is another one I had written down. I just also like watching both these teams play. Kind of interesting, contrast between the two. Timberwolves, they're a younger team that's really athletic, a lot of defense. Clippers, they're kind of a free-flowing offensive team, a lot of veterans, established guys, a little more maturity. And obviously they might, and right now they, would be slated to play in round 2. So as a potential future playoff matchup, I think this one would be great. And I hope that the game kind of performs to the level of the matchup.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I feel like we talked about this matchup last week too. These 2 top teams in the West, one experienced, one inexperienced. Very similar to the Thunder and the Suns game. The Suns have a lot of established veterans. Thunder, young team. What are they going to do on the road against the Suns in a game that I think the Thunder need to keep this hot streak and stay on the top of the West because we don't know what this team's going to be in the playoffs with this young core. So I'm interested to see in big games down the stretch like this how they perform on the road.
Yeah, I feel like these tough road games are a good test for young players, like you mentioned, for shying on them. But man, the Suns, it's weird to say they're almost like not an old team, but Devin Booker's been in the league for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess he's really a certified veteran now, even though he's still relatively young. So it'll be a good test for the Thunder as well.
Yeah, he came in the league really
young. He was really young.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Again, thank you to Dustin Dopirak. Check him out at the Indianapolis Star, covers the Pacers. Want to thank my co-hosts Victor and Gio, and thank you, Jason, Maya, for producing. As always, we'll be back March 4th next Monday. Until then, take care.
Take care.